And here's my sister Natasha. Victoria's voice cut through the warm chatter of our family's Thanksgiving dinner like a blade wrapped in silk. Still working at that little nonprofit downtown, making what, $35,000 a year? Some of us actually learned how to leverage our talents. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The dining room at our parents' house in Millbrook Heights fell silent, except for the gentle clink of silverware against china. 23 family members, from my grandmother Rosalie to my youngest cousin Tyler, all turned their attention to what had become Victoria's annual tradition, publicly dissecting my life choices while carving the turkey. My name is Natasha Winters, and at 31 I've grown accustomed to being the family disappointment, or at least, that's what everyone believes. While my younger sister Victoria climbed the corporate ladder at Pinnacle Financial Group, earning her corner office and six-figure salary by 28, I've spent the last 6 years working for Riverside Community Foundation, a small nonprofit dedicated to affordable housing initiatives in our city. I mean, look at her, Victoria continued, gesturing toward me with her wine glass as she addressed her husband Brandon, who nodded along like a well-trained audience member. Still drives that same beat-up Honda from college, still rents that tiny apartment in the old district. At some point, you have to ask yourself if charity work is really a career or just an extended volunteering phase. Our mother Patricia cleared her throat uncomfortably, trying to redirect the conversation to the cranberry sauce recipe, but Victoria was in full swing. She'd been promoted to senior vice president at Pinnacle just 2 months ago, and every family gathering since had become a platform for her success stories and my perceived failures. Remember when we graduated from Westfield University? Victoria asked rhetorically, her perfectly manicured fingers adjusting the pearl necklace that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Everyone thought Natasha would be the successful one. Perfect GPA, summa cum laude, accepted to 3 different MBA programs. And what did she do? Turned them all down to work for peanuts at a nonprofit. My father, Robert, shifted uncomfortably in his chair at the head of the table, clearly torn between defending his eldest daughter and maintaining family peace. My Aunt Caroline and Uncle James exchanged glances across the table, while my teenage cousins stared at their phones, trying to avoid the second-hand embarrassment radiating from my corner of the room. Don't get me wrong, Victoria continued, her voice taking on that particular tone of fake sympathy that had become her specialty. It's sweet that Natasha wants to help people, but at some point you have to grow up and think about your own future. How is she going to retire, buy a house, start a family on a nonprofit salary? Brandon nodded enthusiastically, apparently forgetting that he'd never worked a day in the nonprofit sector and had landed his marketing job through his father's connections. Victoria's right. In today's economy, you have to be strategic about your career choices. You can't just follow your heart and hope everything works out. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I sat, being lectured about financial responsibility by my sister, who'd blown $15,000 on a handbag last month, and posted about it on her Instagram story. But I maintained my composure, cutting another piece of turkey and letting the conversation wash over me like it had so many times before. I just closed the Hartwell merger last week, Victoria announced to the table, seamlessly transitioning from criticizing my life to celebrating her own. $40 million deal, Pinnacle's biggest acquisition this quarter. Mr. Davidson called it the deal of the year. Our grandfather Edward perked up at the mention of money. As a retired banker himself, he'd always favored Victoria's career path over mine. $40 million? That's impressive, sweetheart. What kind of commission does something like that bring in? Victoria smiled smugly. Let's just say it's more than most people make in several years. Including some people at this table. The pointed look she shot in my direction wasn't subtle. Neither were the uncomfortable chuckles from some of our relatives who seemed to find my financial struggles amusing rather than concerning. You know what I told Mr. Davidson last week? Victoria continued, clearly enjoying her captive audience. I said that success isn't about following passion, it's about following profit. Passion doesn't pay the bills. Passion doesn't build wealth. Passion is what unsuccessful people cling to when they can't face reality. My youngest cousin, Emma, who just started her freshman year at community college, looked visibly deflated. She'd told me earlier about her dream of becoming a teacher, and now Victoria's words seemed to be crushing that aspiration in real time. Take my sister, for example, Victoria said, raising her glass as if proposing a toast. 6 years of following her passion, and what does she have to show for it? A studio apartment, a car that should have been retired 5 years ago, and a savings account that probably couldn't cover a decent vacation. The truth was, Victoria wasn't entirely wrong about my financial situation, at least not on the surface. My apartment was small, my car was old, and I definitely wasn't taking any luxury vacations. But what my sister didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my modest lifestyle wasn't due to lack of opportunity or poor financial planning. I'm not trying to be mean, Victoria concluded, though her tone suggested otherwise. I just think someone in this family needs to have an honest conversation with Natasha about her future. Because charity work is admirable, but it's not sustainable. At some point, reality is going to hit, and it's going to hit hard. As she finished her speech, her phone buzzed on the table. The caller ID showed Office Mr. Davidson. Victoria's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement reserved for calls from the boss on holidays. I should take this, she said, standing and smoothing her designer dress. Mr. Davidson wouldn't call on Thanksgiving unless it was something important. Little did Victoria know that this phone call was about to change everything, not just for her, but for me, and for everyone sitting around that Thanksgiving table. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As Victoria stepped away to take her boss's call, I remained seated at the Thanksgiving table, picking at my sweet potatoes while the familiar weight of family expectations pressed down on my shoulders. The conversations around me resumed in hushed tones, but I could feel the sideways glances and hear the whispered discussions about my situation. This was my reality, 31 years old, and perpetually viewed as the family's cautionary tale. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd once been considered the golden child. Throughout high school, I'd been the one bringing home academic awards and scholarship offers. While Victoria struggled with her grades and spent most weekends at parties, I was in the library or volunteering at the local community center, tutoring kids from low-income families. Our parents had such high hopes for me back then. I remember the pride in my father's voice when he'd introduce me to his colleagues as my daughter, the future CEO. My mother would beam when neighbors asked about my college plans, rattling off the list of prestigious universities courting me with full-ride offers. Victoria, 3 years younger, had always been the social butterfly. Pretty, charming, and effortlessly popular, she coasted through school on C+ grades and natural charisma. While I was earning academic honors, she was being crowned homecoming queen and dating the star quarterback. Our parents worried about her future, often using my achievements as motivation for her to apply herself more seriously. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became a common refrain in our household during Victoria's teenage years. She resented it then. I could see it in her eyes every time the comparison was made. Perhaps that resentment had never really faded. The trajectory shift began in college. While I maintained my perfect GPA and immersed myself in social justice courses, Victoria discovered her talent for business and networking. She joined the right sororities, attended the right parties, and made connections that would serve her well after graduation. Her grades improved dramatically once she found her passion for finance and marketing. By senior year, the family dynamic had begun to shift. Victoria landed a prestigious internship at Pinnacle Financial through a connection she'd made at a charity gala, ironically, one I'd invited her to. Meanwhile, I was declining lucrative job offers to pursue my master's degree in nonprofit management, a decision that baffled everyone except me. "She's throwing away her potential," I'd overheard my mother tell my Aunt Caroline during my graduation party. "All those opportunities, and she wants to work for free helping strangers." The criticism stung, but I'd pressed forward anyway. My thesis focused on innovative funding models for affordable housing initiatives, and during my research, I'd discovered glaring inefficiencies in how nonprofit organizations operated. I saw opportunities where others saw obstacles, solutions where others saw insurmountable problems. After graduation, I'd taken the position at Riverside Community Foundation despite multiple offers from Fortune 500 companies. The starting salary was indeed modest, $35,000 a year, just as Victoria had announced to our entire family tonight. But the work was meaningful, and I had a vision for how the organization could expand its impact. Victoria, meanwhile, had been hired at Pinnacle Financial immediately after college, starting at $65,000, with full benefits and a clear path to advancement. Her social skills and business acumen made her a natural fit for client relations and deal-making. Within 2 years, she'd been promoted twice and was earning more than double my salary. The family narrative crystallized around this time. Victoria became the success story, the daughter who'd figured out how to turn her talents into wealth and status. I became the idealistic dreamer who'd chosen passion over practicality, heart over head. What hurt most wasn't the financial comparison, but watching how the family's respect and attention shifted to Victoria. Suddenly, her opinions carried more weight at family gatherings. Her career updates dominated our conversations. Her achievements were celebrated with expensive dinners and proud social media posts from our parents. My work, meanwhile, was politely acknowledged but never truly understood. When I'd share updates about successful housing projects or families we'd helped transition from shelters to stable homes, the response was always some variation of, "That's nice, dear." When Victoria announced a new client acquisition or promotion, it was front-page news in the family newsletter. The disparity became more pronounced with each passing year. Victoria's lifestyle grew more lavish: designer clothes, expensive vacations, a luxury condo in the prestigious Riverside Heights district. She documented it all on social media, creating a highlight reel of success that our relatives consumed eagerly. My lifestyle, by contrast, remained intentionally modest. I lived in a small but comfortable apartment in the city's arts district, drove my reliable Honda Civic, and spent my free time reading, hiking, or volunteering at the youth center, where I'd first discovered my passion for community work. But what my family saw as stagnation, I knew, was strategic positioning. Every decision I'd made over the past 6 years had been carefully calculated, building towards something much larger than a comfortable salary or impressive job title. From across the dining room, I could hear Victoria's animated voice on the phone with Mr. Davidson. Her tone was professional but excited, the way it always sounded when she was discussing a big deal or important client. She paced near the window, gesturing enthusiastically as she spoke. Little did she know that her boss's call tonight would finally reveal the true scope of my unsuccessful career choices. The foundation I'd been laying for 6 years was about to become visible to everyone, especially Victoria herself. The sweet potatoes had grown cold on my plate, but I wasn't really hungry anyway. The real feast was about to begin. While Victoria continued her animated phone conversation near the bay window, my mind drifted to the painful pattern of family gatherings that had established itself over the past 6 years. Tonight's performance wasn't an aberration. It was the culmination of a tradition that had grown more elaborate with each holiday. Last Christmas had been particularly brutal. Victoria had arrived at our parents' house in her brand-new Tesla Model S, the metallic blue paint gleaming under the driveway lights, like a beacon of success. She'd spent the entire gift-opening session regaling everyone with stories about her year-end bonus, which apparently exceeded my annual salary by a significant margin. "Natasha's still driving that little Honda," she'd announced while unwrapping the expensive jewelry Brandon had given her. "I keep telling her she should let me introduce her to my financial advisor, but she's too proud to accept help." The sting of that memory was sharp, because it highlighted Victoria's particular talent for disguising cruelty as concern. She'd positioned herself as the generous sister trying to help, while simultaneously broadcasting my financial limitations to our entire extended family. Easter dinner 3 months earlier had followed a similar script. Victoria had just returned from a business trip to Geneva, armed with photos and stories about 5-star hotels and Michelin-starred restaurants. She'd spent the appetizer course describing her meetings with international clients, name-dropping executives from companies everyone recognized. "It's such a different world," she'd said, scrolling through her phone to show pictures of the Swiss Alps. "When you're dealing with multi-million-dollar portfolios, everything just operates on a higher level. The attention to detail, the luxury accommodations, it's all part of maintaining the right image for clients." Then came the pivot that I'd learned to expect. Of course, not everyone needs that kind of lifestyle. Natasha's perfectly happy with her simple little life. Different people, different priorities. The words were carefully chosen to sound understanding while actually highlighting the gulf between our circumstances. Victoria had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment, and our family gatherings had become her stage. My birthday dinner last spring had been another masterclass in public humiliation disguised as family celebration. Our parents had chosen a nice restaurant in downtown Millbrook Heights, not expensive by Victoria's standards, but special enough to mark the occasion. I'd been looking forward to a pleasant evening focused on family rather than career comparisons. Victoria had other plans. She'd arrived 20 minutes late, apologizing profusely about a last-minute conference call with a client in Tokyo. The disruption itself was minor, but it set the tone for the evening. Every conversation somehow circled back to her demanding schedule, her important responsibilities, her indispensable role at Pinnacle Financial. "I'm so sorry I almost missed Natasha's birthday," she'd said to our waitress, as if the young woman had asked. "Work has been absolutely crazy. We're in the middle of acquiring 3 new firms, and I'm leading the integration team. Sometimes I forget there's a world outside the office." The waitress had smiled politely and taken our drink orders, but Victoria wasn't finished. She'd spent the next hour detailing her professional achievements while my birthday dinner transformed into her career update presentation. By the time dessert arrived, I felt like a background character at my own celebration. But perhaps the most painful memory was last Thanksgiving, exactly 1 year ago from tonight. Victoria had just been promoted to vice president, a milestone she'd been working toward for 3 years. The announcement came during our traditional pre-meal toast, when family members typically shared what they were grateful for. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to finally reach my potential," Victoria had said, raising her wine glass high. "It's taken hard work and sacrifice, but I've proven that success is possible when you're willing to do whatever it takes." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. While she celebrated reaching her potential, the unspoken message was clear: I had failed to reach mine. Our cousin David, fresh out of college and working his first entry-level job, had looked between Victoria and me with obvious discomfort. "What about you, Natasha? What are you grateful for?" I'd smiled and mentioned the new affordable housing complex that Riverside Community Foundation had just completed, noting that 23 families would be moving into safe, stable homes before the holidays. It was genuinely meaningful work that had required months of coordination, fundraising, and community partnership. Victoria had nodded politely, then immediately shifted the conversation to her upcoming vacation to Bali. "Brandon and I are staying at this incredible resort. The villas are right on the water, and each one has its own private beach access. The whole trip is costing more than most people's rent for 6 months. But you only live once, right?" That comment had stung particularly deeply because it came just hours after I'd explained to our parents why I wouldn't be joining the family ski trip to Aspen. The truth was, I could have afforded it, but I'd chosen to donate that money to the foundation's emergency assistance fund instead. 3 families were facing eviction, and my contribution had made the difference between homelessness and stability. But I couldn't share that detail without sounding defensive or self-righteous, so I'd simply said I was too busy with work. Victoria had seized on this immediately. "That's the thing about nonprofit work," she'd said with mock sympathy. "They demand so much time and energy, but they can never pay enough to actually enjoy life. It's like being a martyr for a cause that most people forget about as soon as they finish reading the tax deduction receipt." The accuracy of her observation was what made it so painful. Most people did forget about affordable housing the moment they stopped thinking about their charitable contributions. But those families living in safe homes because of our work, they didn't forget. Their children attending good schools because they had stable addresses didn't forget. Yet sitting around that table, surrounded by relatives discussing vacation plans and expensive purchases, my work felt invisible and insignificant. Victoria's success was tangible, measurable, enviable. Mine was abstract, complicated to explain, impossible to display on social media. The pattern had become predictable. Victoria's achievements took center stage while my contributions were politely acknowledged and quickly forgotten. She'd learned to position herself as the family's success story while casting me as the well-intentioned but misguided idealist who'd chosen heart over head. Tonight felt like the culmination of all those previous gatherings. Victoria's speech about passion versus profit, her casual dismissal of my career as extended volunteering, her public accounting of my financial limitations, it was the most elaborate performance yet in what had become her ongoing campaign to establish herself as the superior sister. But as I watched her pace excitedly near the window, gesturing animatedly during her phone conversation with Mr. Davidson, I knew this Thanksgiving would be different. The pattern that had defined our family dynamic for 6 years was about to be disrupted in a way that none of them could possibly anticipate. Victoria's phone call was running longer than usual, and her expression had shifted from excited to confused. She kept asking Mr. Davidson to repeat himself, her confident posture gradually giving way to something that looked almost like uncertainty. The performance was about to end, and the real show was about to begin. Victoria ended her phone call and returned to the dining room with the kind of triumphant energy that usually preceded her most devastating performances. Her eyes practically sparkled as she slid back into her chair, and I could see her mentally organizing whatever bombshell she was preparing to drop on our family gathering. "Well," she announced, pausing dramatically to ensure she had everyone's undivided attention, "that was certainly an interesting conversation with Mr. Davidson." Our father looked up from his cranberry sauce with genuine curiosity. "Everything all right at work, sweetheart? Seems unusual for the boss to call on Thanksgiving." Victoria's smile widened, and she placed her manicured hands flat on the table in a gesture I recognized from countless boardroom presentations she'd described to us over the years. This was her power pose, the stance she adopted when delivering news that would cement her status as the family's undisputed success story. "Actually, Dad, everything is more than all right. Mr. Davidson was calling to personally congratulate me on the Morrison Industries acquisition I closed yesterday. Apparently, the client was so impressed with my handling of the deal that they've specifically requested me to lead their entire portfolio restructuring project." Brandon beamed beside her, his chest practically puffing with vicarious pride. "Tell them about the numbers, babe. They need to understand the scale of what you've accomplished." Victoria pretended to hesitate, as if revealing the financial details was somehow immodest, but I could see the excitement bubbling beneath her carefully controlled exterior. This was her moment, and she was going to savor every second of it. "Well, if you insist," she said with false reluctance. "The Morrison deal was worth $87 million. That's the largest single acquisition in Pinnacle Financial's history, in the entire 60-year history of the company." The silence that followed was exactly what Victoria had been hoping for. Our grandfather Edward nearly choked on his wine, while our various aunts and uncles exchanged impressed murmurs around the table. Even my teenage cousins looked up from their phones, suddenly interested in adult conversation. $87 million? Our mother repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Victoria, that's incredible." Victoria nodded solemnly, as if the weight of her achievement was almost too much to bear. It's been months of negotiations, 18-hour days, weekend conference calls, flying back and forth between here and their headquarters in Phoenix. But Mr. Davidson said my persistence and innovative approach to the merger structure was what finally sealed the deal. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a lengthy email chain. He sent me this message right before he called. I probably shouldn't share it, but she paused, glancing around the table with mock uncertainty. Well, I guess your family. Victoria cleared her throat and began reading from her phone with the gravity of someone delivering a presidential address. Victoria, your work on the Morrison acquisition has exceeded every expectation. Your innovative financial modeling and negotiation strategy not only secured the deal, but established a new standard for how we approach major acquisitions. The client specifically mentioned your professionalism and expertise as deciding factors in their decision to move forward. Our Uncle James whistled appreciatively. That's the kind of recognition that leads to corner offices and executive parking spaces. Actually, Victoria said, her smile becoming even more radiant, Mr. Davidson mentioned something about a promotion. Apparently, the board of directors has been discussing creating a new position, Executive Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions. It would make me the youngest EVP in the company's history. The table erupted in congratulations and excited chatter. Our Aunt Caroline reached across to squeeze Victoria's hand, while our cousin Emma asked a dozen questions about what it felt like to make such important business decisions. Even our usually reserved grandmother Rosalie nodded approvingly from her seat at the head of the table. Victoria absorbed the attention like a plant soaking up sunlight, her confidence growing with each compliment and admiring question. She launched into detailed explanations of the acquisition process, using business terminology that made her sound even more impressive to our captivated audience. The beauty of this deal, she continued, was recognizing that Morrison Industries wasn't just acquiring assets. They were acquiring market position. I restructured the entire proposal to emphasize strategic value over pure financial metrics. That's what separated my approach from the dozens of other firms competing for this contract. Brandon nodded enthusiastically, clearly having heard this story multiple times already. Victoria spent 3 weeks creating custom financial projections that showed Morrison exactly how the acquisition would impact their market share over the next decade. She basically rewrote the playbook for how these deals get done. It's not just about the numbers, Victoria explained, now fully in lecture mode. Success at this level requires understanding psychology, market dynamics, and long-term strategic planning. You have to think like a CEO, not just a financial advisor. The irony of that last comment wasn't lost on me, but I kept my expression neutral as Victoria continued her victory lap around the dining room table. Mr. Davidson also mentioned that Morrison Industries has 3 subsidiary companies they're looking to acquire over the next 18 months. If I handle this restructuring project successfully, I'll likely be leading those acquisitions as well. We're talking about deals worth potentially $500 million combined. Our father's eyes widened at the figure. As a retired middle school principal, he'd never dealt with numbers beyond annual school budgets, and Victoria's casual mention of $500 million clearly impressed him beyond measure. Victoria, he said slowly, I knew you were successful, but this is extraordinary. You're operating at a level that most people can only dream about. Victoria's expression softened slightly, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the little girl who used to crave our father's approval above all else. Thanks, Dad. It's been a long journey, but I think I'm finally proving that all those late nights and weekend work sessions were worth it. She turned her attention back to the table, her confidence now at its absolute peak. The best part is that this promotion will come with a substantial salary increase. Mr. Davidson hinted that the new position starts at $400,000 base salary, plus performance bonuses that could easily double that figure. The number hit the table like a thunderclap. $400,000 was more than most of our relatives earned in several years combined, and Victoria clearly knew it. She let the figure hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Of course, with great success comes great responsibility, she said, her tone taking on the philosophical weight of someone dispensing wisdom from the mountaintop. Mr. Davidson specifically mentioned that this role would require someone with uncompromising dedication to excellence, someone who understands that extraordinary achievement demands extraordinary sacrifice. Her eyes found mine across the table, and I could see the pointed message behind her words. This was more than a career update. It was a manifesto about success, ambition, and the fundamental differences between those who achieve greatness and those who settle for mediocrity. Some people, Victoria continued, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used during client presentations, choose comfort over challenge. They find a safe position and stay there, avoiding risk and avoiding growth. But real success, the kind that changes your life and creates lasting impact, requires the courage to pursue excellence even when it's difficult. The lecture was clearly directed at me, but Victoria delivered it to the entire table, positioning herself as the authority on professional achievement and life strategy. She'd reached the absolute pinnacle of her confidence, completely certain that her worldview had been validated by her latest triumph. What Victoria didn't realize was that her moment of maximum certainty was about to collide with a reality she couldn't possibly have anticipated. Her phone, still lying face up on the table beside her wineglass, began to buzz again. The caller ID showed Office Mr. Davidson once more, and Victoria's expression shifted from triumphant to slightly puzzled. "That's strange," she murmured, reaching for the device. "I wonder what he forgot to mention." Victoria's second phone call would have to wait, because she was clearly not finished with her philosophical dissertation on success. She set her phone aside and leaned back in her chair with the satisfied expression of someone who had just delivered a masterclass to an appreciative audience. "You know what I've learned in my years at Pinnacle Financial?" she asked rhetorically, swirling her wineglass with practiced elegance. "Success isn't about intentions or feelings or noble causes. Success is about results. Measurable, tangible, undeniable results." Our cousin David, still navigating his first year in the corporate world, leaned forward with genuine interest. "What do you mean exactly?" Victoria's eyes lit up at the opportunity to expand on her favorite topic. "I mean that the business world doesn't care about your motivations. It doesn't matter if you're passionate about helping people or changing the world or making a difference. What matters is whether you can deliver value, generate revenue, and produce outcomes that move the needle." She gestured toward herself with the kind of casual confidence that comes from absolute certainty in one's worldview. Take my situation, for example. Do I love financial modeling and merger negotiations? Honestly, some days it's incredibly tedious. But I'm exceptional at it, and being exceptional at valuable skills creates opportunities. That's how you build wealth, influence, and security. Our mother nodded thoughtfully, clearly impressed by Victoria's pragmatic approach to career development. "That's very wise, sweetheart. It sounds like you've really figured out how to navigate the professional world." "Exactly, Mom. And that's what I've been trying to explain to certain people in this family." Victoria's gaze flickered meaningfully in my direction before returning to the broader audience. "The harsh reality is that good intentions don't pay mortgages. Wanting to help people doesn't create retirement funds. Making a difference doesn't build generational wealth." Brandon picked up the thread seamlessly, clearly having participated in this conversation many times before. Victoria's right. We've seen so many friends from college who chose careers based on passion instead of practicality. Most of them are struggling financially, living paycheck to paycheck, unable to afford the kind of lifestyle they actually want. "It's not their fault," Victoria added with a tone of magnanimous understanding. "Society tells young people to follow their dreams and pursue their passions. But nobody explains that passion without profit is just an expensive hobby." Our Aunt Caroline, who had worked as a teacher for 30 years before retiring, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. But surely there's value in work that serves the community, even if it doesn't pay as well? Victoria's smile remained perfectly polite, but I could see the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated she was preparing to deliver a particularly pointed response. Of course there's value in community service, Aunt Caroline. Volunteers are wonderful, and we need people who are willing to donate their time and energy to worthy causes. But let's be honest about what that choice means. She paused to take a sip of wine, clearly savoring the moment before delivering her knockout punch. When you choose passion over profit, you're essentially choosing to remain financially dependent on others. You're choosing to limit your own options, your own security, your own ability to provide for your family. And ultimately, you're limiting your actual impact because you don't have the resources to create meaningful change. The logic was seductive in its simplicity, and I could see several family members nodding along with Victoria's reasoning. She'd always been skilled at presenting complex issues in terms that made her position seem not just preferable, but inevitable. Think about it this way, Victoria continued, now fully warmed up to her favorite subject. If I wanted to help homeless families, I could volunteer at a shelter on weekends and feel good about myself. Or I could use my financial success to fund an entire housing program. Which approach actually helps more people? It was a cleverly constructed argument that positioned her wealth accumulation as a form of altruism, and I had to admire the rhetorical skill, even as I recognized the fundamental flaws in her reasoning. The truth is, Victoria said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone delivering final judgment, that the people who create real change in the world are the people who understand how to generate resources. Nonprofits depend on donations from successful business people. Charitable foundations are funded by entrepreneurs and executives. Even government social programs rely on tax revenue generated by profitable companies. She spread her hands as if the conclusion was self-evident. So when someone chooses to work for a nonprofit instead of building wealth, they're actually choosing to be dependent on other people's success rather than creating their own capacity for impact. Our grandfather Edward, ever the pragmatist, nodded approvingly. That's a very mature way to look at it, Victoria. When I was building my banking career, I used to tell young employees that you can't give away what you don't have. Financial success gives you options that good intentions simply can't provide. Victoria beamed at the validation from our family patriarch. Exactly, Grandpa. And that's why I've structured my entire career around maximizing my earning potential. Every decision I make is filtered through a simple question. Will this choice increase my capacity to create value and generate wealth? She turned her attention directly to me for the first time since returning from her phone call, her expression mixing pity with what she probably considered sisterly concern. Natasha, I know you think I'm being materialistic or shallow, but I'm actually being strategic about impact. In 5 years, when I'm a senior executive earning 7 figures annually, I'll be able to contribute more to charitable causes in a single year than most nonprofit workers contribute in their entire careers. The statement hung in the air like a challenge, and I could feel the expectant silence of our family waiting for my response. Victoria had constructed her argument carefully, positioning herself not as selfish or greedy, but as someone who understood the sophisticated realities of creating meaningful change in the world. Plus, Victoria added with a slight smile, there's something to be said for being able to enjoy life while you're living it. I work hard, but I can also afford to travel, to experience culture, to enjoy the finer things that make life rich and fulfilling. I don't have to choose between making a difference and living well. I can do both. Brandon nodded enthusiastically. That's what people don't understand about ambitious careers. Yes, Victoria works long hours and takes on enormous responsibility, but she's also able to live the kind of life that most people only dream about. We can afford to be generous with others because we've been smart about building our own security first. The philosophical framework Victoria had constructed was internally consistent and superficially appealing. She'd managed to position wealth accumulation as a form of social responsibility, luxury consumption as a reward for value creation, and financial success as the ultimate measure of one's capacity for positive impact. What made her argument particularly insidious was that it contained just enough truth to seem reasonable. Wealthy individuals and profitable companies do fund charitable organizations. Financial resources do create options for helping others. Success in business can indeed translate into greater capacity for philanthropy. But Victoria's worldview was built on a fundamental assumption that she'd never questioned, that the current economic system was not just inevitable, but optimal. That maximizing individual wealth was the best way to maximize social benefit. That the path to meaningful change necessarily ran through corporate boardrooms and investment portfolios. She'd never considered that there might be forms of value that couldn't be measured in dollars, types of impact that couldn't be quantified in quarterly reports, or definitions of success that had nothing to do with net worth or job titles. As Victoria's phone buzzed again with another call from Mr. Davidson, I realized that her entire identity had become wrapped up in this particular conception of success. Her self-worth, her family status, her fundamental understanding of her place in the world. All of it was built on the assumption that her approach to life was not just personally satisfying, but morally superior. What she didn't know was that her carefully constructed philosophy was about to collide with a reality that would challenge every assumption she'd built her life upon. The phone call she was about to take would reveal that success, impact, and value creation might look very different than she'd ever imagined. Victoria's phone had been buzzing persistently for the past 30 seconds, but she seemed reluctant to interrupt her philosophical victory lap to answer it. The caller ID continued to display Office Mr. Davidson, and finally, our father cleared his throat gently. Victoria, perhaps you should take that call. Your boss seems quite insistent. With a slight frown, Victoria picked up her phone and swiped to answer. Hello, Mr. Davidson. I wasn't expecting to hear from you again so soon. Her tone was professional but relaxed, still riding the high of their previous conversation about the Morrison deal. She put the phone to her ear, expecting perhaps a few additional details about her upcoming promotion, or maybe congratulations from other board members who had heard about her success. Instead, Victoria's expression began to shift almost immediately. The confident smile faded first, replaced by a look of confusion. Then came a furrowing of her brow as she pressed the phone closer to her ear, as if she hadn't heard correctly. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Victoria's voice had lost its earlier triumphant tone. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. The dining room had fallen silent, all conversations stopping as our family noticed the dramatic change in Victoria's demeanor. Her free hand moved to grip the edge of the table, her knuckles gradually turning white as whatever Mr. Davidson was telling her sank in. But I don't understand, Victoria said, her voice becoming increasingly strained. We just spoke 20 minutes ago about the Morrison deal, about my promotion prospects. What do you mean there's been a development? Brandon leaned closer to his wife, his own expression shifting from proud satisfaction to concerned confusion. Our parents exchanged worried glances across the table, while our various relatives watched the unfolding drama with the fascination of people witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Mr. Davidson, Victoria's voice was now barely controlled, with an edge of desperation creeping in. Can you please explain exactly what this means for my position at the company? Because from where I'm sitting, this sounds like... She trailed off, listening intently to whatever her boss was saying on the other end of the line. Her face had gone pale beneath her perfectly applied makeup, and I could see her struggling to maintain her composure in front of our entire family. Yes, I understand that these things happen in business, Victoria said, though her tone suggested she didn't understand at all. But surely there must be some mistake. The Morrison deal was finalized yesterday. I have all the paperwork. I closed that deal myself. Another long pause as she listened, her expression growing more stricken with each passing second. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, less certain than I'd heard it in years. What do you mean, technically, my deal? Mr. Davidson, I negotiated every aspect of that acquisition. I spent months building the relationship with Morrison Industries. How can you say it was technically someone else's deal? The transformation was remarkable to witness. The confident executive who had been lecturing our family about success and value creation just minutes earlier was now struggling to understand how her greatest professional triumph was being pulled out from under her. "I need to understand the timeline here," Victoria said, her voice becoming more agitated. "When exactly did this acquisition of Pinnacle Financial take place? Because nobody informed me that the company was even for sale." The words "acquisition of Pinnacle Financial" hit the table like a bombshell. Our entire family leaned forward slightly, trying to piece together what was happening from Victoria's half of the conversation. The idea that her company had been acquired was clearly news to everyone, including Victoria herself. 6 months? Victoria's voice cracked slightly. "Mr. Davidson, are you telling me that someone has been quietly acquiring shares in Pinnacle Financial for 6 months, and this is the first I'm hearing about it?" She was trying to maintain her professional composure, but I could see the panic building behind her eyes. Everything she had built her identity around, her position at Pinnacle, her recent promotion prospects, her status as the company's rising star, was apparently built on a foundation that was shifting beneath her feet. "Yes, I understand that these transitions take time to finalize," Victoria said, though she sounded like she understood nothing at all. "But what I don't understand is how the Morrison deal factors into this. You said it was the largest acquisition in company history. You said I was being considered for executive vice president." Another pause, longer this time, and when Victoria spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "What do you mean the new ownership has different plans?" The silence in our dining room was deafening. Every family member was watching Victoria's face as she processed whatever earth-shattering information Mr. Davidson was delivering. Her earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like fear. "Mr. Davidson," Victoria said, clearly struggling to keep her voice steady, "I need you to be very clear with me. What exactly does this mean for my employment status? Are you saying that the new owners might not honor the promotion we discussed?" She listened for another moment, then closed her eyes as if trying to ward off a migraine. "I see. And when will I have the opportunity to meet with the new CEO to discuss my role going forward?" The mention of a new CEO sent another ripple of shock through our family. Not only had Victoria's company been acquired without her knowledge, but there was apparently new leadership that would be making decisions about her future. "Tomorrow?" Victoria's eyes snapped open. "Mr. Davidson, tomorrow is Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. Surely this could wait until Monday?" But apparently it couldn't wait, because Victoria's expression grew even more strained as she listened to his response. "I understand that the new CEO wants to meet with all senior staff immediately, but I have to say, this timing seems highly unusual." She paused, listening, then asked the question that seemed to be causing her the most anxiety. "Do you have any insight into what the new leadership's priorities might be? Because based on my track record, especially with the Morrison deal, I would hope that my value to the organization is clear." Whatever Mr. Davidson said in response seemed to deflate Victoria's remaining hope. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a note of resignation that I'd never heard from her before. "I see. So you're saying that the new CEO will be evaluating all personnel decisions from scratch, regardless of previous performance or relationships with existing management." The implications were starting to sink in for everyone at the table. Victoria's entire power structure at Pinnacle Financial, her relationship with Mr. Davidson, her reputation for closing major deals, her trajectory toward executive leadership, was potentially meaningless under new ownership. "Mr. Davidson," Victoria said, making one last attempt to regain some control over the situation, "can you at least tell me who the new CEO is? I'd like to do some research before our meeting tomorrow so I can present myself and my contributions to the company in the best possible light." She listened intently to his response, And for the first time since answering the phone, a flicker of something that might have been hope crossed her face. Actually, that's interesting. The name sounds familiar, but I can't quite place it. Could you spell the last name for me? Victoria grabbed a napkin from the table and began writing down what Mr. Davidson was telling her. As she wrote, her expression shifted from hope to confusion to something that looked almost like recognition. Winters, she repeated slowly, staring at what she had written. And the first name is Natasha? The color drained completely from Victoria's face as the pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place. Her eyes moved from the napkin to my face, then back to the napkin, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Mr. Davidson, she said in a voice barely above a whisper, could you describe this Natasha Winters for me? Because I think I might know who you're talking about. Mr. Davidson's voice carried clearly through Victoria's phone, apparently confirming her worst fears. I watched as my sister's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, recognition, and finally, a kind of dawning horror that was almost painful to witness. Yes, Victoria said in a hollow voice. I know exactly who Natasha Winters is. She's my sister. The dining room erupted into confused murmurs as our family tried to process this impossible revelation. Our father looked back and forth between Victoria and me with complete bewilderment, while our mother's hand flew to her chest in shock. Mr. Davidson, Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger as she fought to regain some professional composure, I need to understand something. Are you telling me that my sister, who works for a small nonprofit organization, has somehow acquired Pinnacle Financial Group? The pause that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Victoria's eyes remained locked on mine, searching for some sign that this was all an elaborate joke or misunderstanding. But I maintained my calm expression, the same neutral face I'd worn through countless family gatherings where she'd dismissed my career and mocked my choices. I see, Victoria said finally, though her tone suggested she saw nothing at all. And you're certain about this? Because, Mr. Davidson, with all due respect, this seems impossible. Our grandfather Edward leaned forward in his chair, his banker's instincts apparently overriding his confusion. Victoria, what exactly is your boss telling you? Victoria held up one finger, indicating she needed to finish the call before she could explain anything to our family. Mr. Davidson, can you help me understand the timeline here? When did this acquisition process begin? Because I've been at Pinnacle for 7 years, and I've never heard so much as a whisper about any potential ownership changes. As she listened to his response, Victoria's already pale complexion seemed to lose another shade of color. 2 years? You're saying this has been in progress for 2 years? The number hit our family like a physical blow. 2 years meant that while Victoria had been celebrating promotions and bragging about her deals, the entire ownership structure of her company had been quietly changing hands. And somehow I had been involved in that process. But how is this possible? Victoria asked, her professional facade finally beginning to crack completely. Mr. Davidson, my sister works for a nonprofit. She makes $35,000 a year. She drives a 15-year-old Honda Civic. How could she possibly have the resources to acquire a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars? The desperation in her voice was becoming more apparent with each question. Victoria had built her entire identity around being the successful sister, the one who understood how money and power worked, the one who had figured out how to navigate the complex world of corporate finance. The idea that I might have been operating at a level she couldn't even comprehend was challenging everything she believed about herself and our family dynamic. Investment consortium? Victoria repeated, latching onto Mr. Davidson's explanation like a drowning person grasping for a life preserver. So she's not acting alone? There are other investors involved? But whatever clarification Mr. Davidson provided didn't seem to offer Victoria much comfort. Her grip on the phone tightened, and I could see her struggling to maintain her composure in front of our entire extended family. Mr. Davidson, I need to ask you directly, what does this mean for my position at the company? I've been one of your top performers for years. I just closed the Morrison deal yesterday. Surely the new ownership would want to retain their most successful employees. The silence that followed was answer enough. Victoria's face crumpled slightly as she absorbed whatever Mr. Davidson was telling her about her job security under the new regime. I understand that all personnel decisions will be reviewed, Victoria said, her voice barely steady. But can you give me any indication of what I should expect in tomorrow's meeting? Any sense of what the new CEO's priorities might be? Our cousin David, who had been hanging on every word of Victoria's side of the conversation, whispered to his mother, "I don't understand what's happening. How can Natasha be anyone's boss?" The question echoed what everyone in the room was thinking. Just 30 minutes earlier, Victoria had been lecturing us all about success and value creation, positioning herself as the family expert on corporate achievement. Now she was apparently scheduled for a meeting with her new boss, a boss who happened to be the sister she'd been publicly humiliating all evening. "Mr. Davidson," Victoria said, making one more attempt to gather information, "can you tell me anything about Ms. Winters' background, her experience in financial services, her plans for the company?" As she listened to his response, Victoria's expression grew even more confused. "Nonprofit management? Are you saying that the new CEO's background is in nonprofit management?" The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. Victoria had spent the entire evening explaining to our family why nonprofit work was basically an extended form of volunteering, why passion without profit was just an expensive hobby, why real success required abandoning idealistic pursuits for practical wealth building. Now she was learning that someone with exactly the background she'd been dismissing had somehow acquired her company. "I see," Victoria said, though she clearly didn't see anything at all. "And this acquisition was financed through—" "I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Impact investing? What exactly does that mean?" The term seemed to confuse her even further. Victoria had always operated in the traditional world of corporate finance, where success was measured in quarterly earnings and shareholder value. The concept of impact investing, using financial tools to create positive social outcomes, was apparently outside her area of expertise. "Mr. Davidson, I appreciate you taking the time to explain this situation to me, especially on Thanksgiving," Victoria said, clearly trying to end the conversation before she revealed any more of her ignorance to our family. "I'll be there tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock for the meeting with Ms. Winters." She paused, listening to one final comment from her boss, then nodded grimly. "Yes, I understand that I should prepare to discuss my role at the company and my vision for moving forward. Thank you for the heads up." Victoria ended the call and sat in stunned silence for several long moments, staring at her phone as if it might suddenly reveal that the entire conversation had been a practical joke. The confidence that had radiated from her just minutes earlier had been completely replaced by uncertainty and fear. Our father was the first to break the silence. "Victoria, can you please explain to us what just happened? Because from what I could hear, it sounds like Natasha has somehow bought your company." Victoria looked up at our father with the expression of someone who had just discovered that everything they thought they knew about the world was wrong. "That's exactly what happened, Dad. According to Mr. Davidson, Natasha has been quietly acquiring shares in Pinnacle Financial for the past 2 years through something called an impact investing consortium. As of today, she owns controlling interest in the company." She turned to look at me directly for the first time since the phone call began, her eyes searching my face for some explanation that would make sense of this impossible situation. "Tomorrow morning," Victoria continued, her voice hollow with disbelief, "I have a meeting with the new CEO of Pinnacle Financial Group. And apparently that CEO is my sister Natasha, who I've been telling everyone makes $35,000 a year working for a nonprofit." The weight of her words settled over our Thanksgiving table like fog rolling in from the ocean. Everything Victoria had said about success, about value creation, about the superiority of corporate achievement over nonprofit work, had suddenly been turned on its head. And I hadn't said a single word yet. The silence that followed Victoria's explanation was deafening. 23 family members sat frozen around our Thanksgiving table, trying to process what they'd just heard. My younger cousin Emma was the first to break the spell, her voice barely above a whisper. "Natasha, is this real? Did you really buy Victoria's company?" All eyes turned to me, and I could feel the weight of their collective disbelief, curiosity, and confusion. For 6 years, I had sat quietly through Victoria's performances, absorbing her criticisms and enduring her lectures about success and failure. Now, finally, it was my turn to speak. I set down my water glass and looked around the table, meeting each family member's gaze before settling on Victoria's stricken face. "It's real, Emma, though I didn't exactly buy Pinnacle Financial in the traditional sense." Our father leaned forward, his voice gentle but urgent. "Natasha, honey, we need you to explain what's happening here. Because what Victoria just told us seems impossible." I took a deep breath, knowing that everything I was about to say would fundamentally change how my family saw me, and how Victoria understood her place in the world. 6 years ago, when I started working at Riverside Community Foundation, I wasn't just taking a job. I was positioning myself to solve one of the biggest problems in affordable housing development: access to large-scale financing. Victoria's brow furrowed as she tried to follow my explanation. "What does affordable housing have to do with acquiring a financial services company?" "Everything," I replied, turning to address the entire table. Traditional banks and investment firms have never been particularly interested in financing affordable housing projects. The profit margins are lower, the timelines are longer, and the social impact metrics don't translate easily into quarterly earnings reports. Our grandfather Edward, with his decades of banking experience, nodded slowly. "That's true. Community development has always been a challenging sector for conventional financing." "Exactly, Grandpa." So I started thinking about what it would take to create a different kind of financial institution. One that could generate competitive returns for investors while also prioritizing social impact. That's where impact investing comes in. I could see several family members exchanging confused glances, so I continued with a simpler explanation. Impact investing is a strategy where you use traditional financial tools to create positive social outcomes while still generating profits. Instead of choosing between doing good and doing well financially, you find ways to do both. Victoria's voice was strained as she asked, "But Natasha, where did you get the money to invest in anything? You work for a nonprofit." "That's what I needed everyone to believe," I said gently. "Victoria, do you remember my master's thesis? The one about innovative funding models for affordable housing?" She nodded reluctantly, clearly not seeing the connection. That thesis caught the attention of some very influential people in the impact investing community. People who had been looking for someone with both the technical expertise and the passion to lead a major initiative in social finance. I paused, letting that sink in. 3 months after I graduated, I was offered a position as the founding director of the Riverside Impact Investment Consortium. Our mother's hand flew to her chest. "Natasha, are you saying you've been working for a different organization this entire time?" "Not different, Mom, expanded. Riverside Community Foundation was always part of the plan, but it was never the whole plan. The foundation serves as our ground-level implementation arm, while the consortium handles the large-scale financing and acquisition strategy." Brandon, who had been silent throughout this revelation, finally spoke up. "How large-scale are we talking about here?" I turned to meet his gaze directly. Over the past 6 years, the Riverside Impact Investment Consortium has managed approximately $2.3 billion in impact investments across housing, renewable energy, and financial inclusion initiatives. The number hit the table like a physical blow. Several family members gasped audibly, while Victoria looked like she might be sick. Brandon's mouth fell open, and he stared at me as if I'd suddenly sprouted wings. "2.3 billion?" our father repeated, his voice barely functioning. "Natasha, did you just say billion with a B?" Yes, Dad. And Pinnacle Financial Group was identified as a strategic acquisition target because of their existing client relationships in the commercial real estate sector. We needed a platform that could scale our affordable housing initiatives from hundreds of units to thousands of units annually. Victoria found her voice, though it sounded nothing like the confident executive who had been lecturing us about success an hour earlier. But how could you afford to buy Pinnacle? The company is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The consortium includes some of the most significant family foundations, university endowments, and socially conscious investment funds in North America, I explained. When you combine that kind of capital with a proven track record of generating both financial returns and social impact, acquiring a mid-sized financial services firm becomes entirely feasible. Our Uncle James, who had been trying to follow the conversation with increasing bewilderment, raised his hand like a student in class. Natasha, are you telling us that you've been running a multi-billion-dollar investment fund while we all thought you were just working at a small nonprofit? The nonprofit work was never just anything, Uncle James. Every project we completed at Riverside Community Foundation was also a proof of concept for larger-scale implementation. Every family we helped transition into stable housing was part of a data set that demonstrated the viability of our investment model to potential consortium partners. I could see Victoria struggling to reconcile this information with everything she thought she knew about success, wealth, and business strategy. But Natasha, why didn't you tell us? Why let everyone think you were struggling financially? Because I needed to focus on the work, not on managing family expectations or dealing with questions about money, I replied honestly. And because I knew that if our relatives understood the scale of what I was doing, it would change every interaction, every conversation, every family gathering. Our cousin David, still trying to process the magnitude of what I'd revealed, asked, "So when Victoria was talking about her $87 million deal, you were managing deals worth?" Our most recent affordable housing initiative will develop 12,000 units across 15 cities over the next 4 years, I said. The total project value is approximately $1.8 billion, with financing structured to ensure 30-year affordability commitments. Victoria's face had gone completely white. Natasha, that means when I was celebrating the biggest deal in Pinnacle's history, you were working on projects that are literally 20 times larger. Scale isn't the point, Victoria. Impact is the point. Those 12,000 housing units will provide stable homes for families who otherwise might never have the opportunity to build wealth or establish roots in their communities. The financial returns from the project will fund the next phase of development, creating a sustainable cycle of growth and social benefit. Our grandmother Rosalie, who had been listening with the intense concentration of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle, finally spoke. Natasha, dear, when you say you've acquired Pinnacle Financial, what exactly does that mean for Victoria's job? The question everyone had been avoiding finally hung in the air between us. Victoria's eyes locked onto mine, and I could see both fear and a desperate hope that somehow her position might be secure, despite everything that had just been revealed. Well, Grandma, I said carefully, that depends entirely on Victoria's willingness to learn a completely different approach to financial services. The Pinnacle Financial Group under consortium ownership will focus exclusively on impact investing and social finance initiatives. Victoria's voice was barely audible when she asked, "What about traditional corporate finance? Mergers and acquisitions, the kind of work I've been doing?" I met her eyes directly, seeing my little sister's vulnerability beneath the corporate facade she'd maintained for so many years. Victoria, everything you've learned about deal structure, client relations, and financial modeling is valuable. But tomorrow, we're going to discuss how those skills can be applied to creating positive social outcomes, instead of just maximizing shareholder value. The power dynamic that had defined our family relationships for 6 years had just been completely reversed, and everyone at the table knew it. Victoria's champagne glass slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor, the crystal fragments scattering across the dining room like fallen stars. The sharp crash seemed to break whatever spell had held our family in stunned silence, and suddenly everyone was talking at once. "This can't be happening," Victoria whispered, staring at the broken glass as if it represented everything she thought she knew about her life. "This cannot be happening." Our mother immediately moved to clean up the shards, but Victoria grabbed her wrist to stop her. "Mom, leave it. Please, just leave it." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I could see years of carefully constructed confidence crumbling in real time. Brandon looked between Victoria and me with the expression of someone who had just discovered that gravity worked in reverse. "Victoria, honey, I think you need to sit down properly. You look like you're about to faint." "Faint?" Victoria's voice rose to a pitch I'd never heard from her before. "Brandon, do you understand what just happened? Do you comprehend the magnitude of what Natasha just told us?" She turned to face me directly, her designer makeup no longer able to hide the pallor that had spread across her face. "You let me humiliate myself. For 6 years, Natasha. For 6 entire years, you sat there and let me lecture you about success and money and career choices, knowing that you were operating at a level one couldn't even imagine." The accusation hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of every family member's attention as they waited for my response. Our cousin Emma shifted uncomfortably in her chair, while our teenage relatives stared at their phones, trying to escape the second-hand embarrassment radiating from Victoria's corner of the table. "Victoria," I said gently, "I never asked you to." "Don't," she cut me off, her voice sharp with a pain that went deeper than professional embarrassment. "Don't you dare tell me this is my fault. You could have stopped this at any time. You could have said something, anything, to prevent me from making a fool of myself in front of our entire family." Our father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Girls, perhaps we should." "No, Dad," Victoria said, standing abruptly and beginning to pace behind her chair like a caged animal. "I need to understand this. I need to understand how my sister, who I've been treating like a charity case for 6 years, has been secretly running a multi-billion-dollar investment fund." The pacing was making everyone nervous, but Victoria seemed incapable of sitting still. Her perfectly styled hair was beginning to come undone, and she kept running her hands through it in a way that suggested she was close to a complete breakdown. "Do you know what I told my colleagues about you?" Victoria asked, her voice becoming increasingly agitated. "Do you know how many times I've used you as an example of what happens when someone chooses passion over practicality?" Brandon reached out to touch her arm, but she shrugged him off and continued her frantic movement around the dining room. "I told them about my sister, who turned down MBA programs to work for peanuts at a nonprofit. I told them about how idealistic people end up struggling financially because they don't understand how the real world works." Our Uncle James exchanged an uncomfortable glance with our Aunt Caroline, clearly wishing he could disappear from what was rapidly becoming a very public family meltdown. "Victoria," our mother said softly, "maybe you should take a moment to—" "A moment to what, Mom?" "To process the fact that everything I thought I knew about success was wrong?" Victoria's laugh had a hysterical edge that made everyone in the room wince. "Do you realize that while I was celebrating my $87 million deal like it was the achievement of a lifetime, Natasha was working on projects worth 20 times that amount?" She stopped pacing and faced our family with the wild-eyed expression of someone whose fundamental worldview had just been shattered. "Do you understand what this means for my career, for my reputation? Tomorrow I have to walk into a meeting with my new boss. And that boss is the sister I've been publicly dismissing as a failure for years." The practical implications of her situation were beginning to sink in, and I could see the panic building in her eyes. "Everyone at Pinnacle knows about my family. I've talked about Natasha in staff meetings. I've used her as an example of what happens when talented people make poor career choices." Brandon's face had gone ashen as he realized the professional consequences his wife was facing. "Victoria, surely Natasha won't. I mean, she wouldn't use personal family issues to affect your job, right?" The question was directed at me, but Victoria answered before I could speak. "Why wouldn't she? If I were in her position, after years of being humiliated and dismissed, wouldn't I want revenge?" Our grandfather Edward, who had been unusually quiet throughout this revelation, finally spoke with the authority of someone who had navigated decades of business relationships. Victoria, you need to calm down and think strategically. Panicking won't help your situation. Strategically? Victoria's voice cracked again. Grandpa, how do you think strategically when you discover that your entire understanding of your family dynamic was completely wrong? When you realize that the person you've been condescending to for years actually holds your professional future in their hands? She turned back to me, and for the first time since we were children, I saw genuine vulnerability in her eyes beneath the panic and embarrassment. Natasha, I need to know. What's going to happen to my job? Are you going to fire me? The question silenced the entire table. Even our youngest cousins had stopped pretending to look at their phones and were watching this drama unfold with fascination. This was the moment everyone had been building toward. Would I use my newfound power to punish Victoria for years of humiliation? Because if you were going to fire me, Victoria continued, her voice becoming smaller and more desperate, could you at least give me some warning? Some time to find another position? I have a mortgage, car payments, credit card debt from all those expensive dinners and vacations I've been posting about on social media. The mention of debt surprised everyone, including me. Victoria's lifestyle had always appeared effortlessly luxurious, but apparently maintaining that image had come at a significant financial cost. I've been living beyond my means for years, Victoria admitted, collapsing back into her chair as if the confession had drained all her energy. The Tesla lease, the designer clothes, the Riverside Heights condo. I could afford the payments because of my salary and bonuses at Pinnacle, but I don't have significant savings. Our mother looked stricken. Victoria, honey, why didn't you ever mention? Because I was supposed to be the successful one. Victoria's voice rose again, but this time it carried exhaustion rather than anger. I was supposed to be the daughter who had figured out how to build wealth and security. How could I admit that it was all leveraged? That I was one missed promotion away from financial trouble? The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. Victoria's confident presentations about financial success had apparently been built on a foundation of debt and image management, while my modest lifestyle had hidden actual wealth and security. So yes, Natasha, Victoria said, looking directly at me with eyes that were beginning to fill with tears, I need to know what's going to happen to my job. Because if you're going to destroy my career as payback for how I've treated you, I need to start figuring out how to rebuild my life from scratch. The entire room held its breath, waiting to see how I would respond to my sister's vulnerability and desperation. The power dynamic that had defined our relationship for years had been completely reversed, and everyone knew that my next words would determine not just Victoria's professional future, but the trajectory of our family relationships for years to come. The weight of Victoria's question hung over our Thanksgiving table like storm clouds, and I could feel every family member holding their breath as they waited for my response. The power to destroy my sister's career was literally in my hands, and everyone in the room understood the magnitude of this moment. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Victoria, I think we need to have this conversation privately. Would you mind stepping out to the back porch with me? Victoria's eyes widened with what looked like terror. A private conversation could mean anything. A brutal confrontation away from family witnesses, a calculated revenge for years of humiliation, or perhaps something else entirely. She nodded shakily and followed me through the kitchen toward the sliding glass doors that led to our parents' back deck. The November air was crisp and cold, a sharp contrast to the warm tension we'd left behind in the dining room. Our parents' backyard stretched out before us, the same space where we'd played as children, where we'd learned to ride bikes and had countless summer barbecues. Now it felt like neutral ground for what might be the most important conversation of our adult lives. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself, shivering slightly in her designer dress that hadn't been chosen for outdoor November weather. Natasha, before you say anything, I need to tell you something. I leaned against the porch railing, studying my sister's face in the light from the kitchen windows. I'm listening. I know how I've treated you. I know what I've said, how I've acted, the way I've talked about your choices in front of our family. Victoria's voice was steadier now, but I could hear the effort it was taking for her to maintain control. And I know that if our positions were reversed, if I had the power to ruin your career after years of you humiliating me, I probably would. The admission hung between us, honest in its brutality. Victoria had always been direct about her ambitions and her philosophy, but this was perhaps the first time she'd been equally direct about her flaws. That's who I am, Natasha. That's who I've become. Someone who steps on others to climb higher. Someone who uses other people's struggles as examples of what not to do. She paused, staring out at the darkened yard. Someone who would absolutely seek revenge if given the opportunity. I remained silent, letting her continue. This was clearly something Victoria needed to say, and I sensed that interrupting would only derail what might be the most honest conversation we'd had in years. Do you want to know the truth about why I've been so awful to you? Victoria asked, turning to face me directly. It's not because I thought you were making bad choices. It's because I was terrified that you were making better choices than I was. The confession surprised me. In all my analysis of our family dynamic, I had never considered that Victoria's cruelty might stem from insecurity rather than genuine superiority. When we were kids, you were always the smart one, the responsible one, the one everyone expected to succeed. And I was the pretty one, the social one, the one who coasted on charm and connections. Victoria's breath created small clouds in the cold air as she spoke. When you turned down those MBA programs to work in nonprofit, I thought I had finally found my chance to be the successful daughter. She laughed bitterly, the sound carrying across the quiet yard. For 6 years, I've been living in terror that you would suddenly change your mind and decide to pursue traditional success. Because I knew that if you ever applied your intelligence and work ethic to building wealth the way I was trying to, you'd leave me in the dust. The revelation reframed every family gathering, every condescending comment, every lecture about practical career choices. Victoria hadn't been punching down at a struggling sister. She'd been desperately trying to keep a perceived threat from realizing her potential. So I convinced myself that you were naive, that you didn't understand how the real world worked, that your choices were admirable but impractical. Victoria's voice was becoming more emotional as she continued. It was easier to believe that than to admit that maybe you understood something about success that I didn't. I finally spoke, my voice gentle in the cold air. Victoria, what made you think that wealth and career advancement were the only measures of success worth pursuing? She looked at me with surprise, as if the question had never occurred to her. I don't know, maybe because that's what our family celebrated? What our friends respected? What made people take you seriously? But did it make you happy? I asked. The question seemed to catch Victoria off guard. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently struggling to find an answer. I thought it did, she said finally. The promotions, the salary increases, the lifestyle, the respect from colleagues. It felt like winning. It felt like I was proving something important about myself. What were you trying to prove? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. That I wasn't just the pretty sister who got by on charm. That I had substance, intelligence, real value beyond my appearance or social skills. The vulnerability in her admission was striking. For all her confidence and ambition, Victoria had been driven by the same need for validation that motivates many high achievers, the desire to prove her worth through external recognition. But somewhere along the way, Victoria continued, proving my worth became connected to proving that other people, specifically you, had less worth. As if success were a finite resource and the only way for me to have enough was to make sure you didn't have any. She turned to face me fully, her eyes reflecting the kitchen light. Natasha, I need you to understand something. When I belittled your work, when I dismissed your choices, when I made those cruel comments about your lifestyle, I wasn't really talking about you. I was talking about my own fears. What fears? That maybe money and status aren't actually the most important things. That maybe making a difference in people's lives is more valuable than making a profit. That maybe you had figured out something about meaning and purpose that I was too scared to explore. The admission was perhaps the most honest thing Victoria had ever said to me. It explained not just her behavior, but the intensity of her need to position herself as the family's success story. Every time I saw you come home from work genuinely excited about helping a family find housing, or when you talked about policy changes that could impact thousands of people, I felt this terrible fear that you were living a richer life than I was, even without the money. Victoria's voice broke slightly as she continued. So I doubled down on the only kind of success I understood. I worked longer hours, pursued bigger deals, bought more expensive things, all to prove to myself and everyone else that I had chosen the right path. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup slightly. But tonight, learning what you've actually accomplished, understanding the scale of your impact, it's like discovering that while I was playing checkers, you were playing chess on a board I couldn't even see. The metaphor was apt, and I could see that Victoria was beginning to understand not just the magnitude of what I'd accomplished, but the fundamental difference in our approaches to success. Natasha, Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper, I don't even know who I am if I'm not the successful sister. If wealth and status aren't the measures of worth I thought they were, then what have I been building my identity on for the past 6 years? The question revealed the depth of Victoria's crisis. This wasn't just about her job security or professional embarrassment. It was about the complete collapse of her understanding of herself and her place in the world. And now, Victoria continued, tomorrow I have to walk into a meeting where the sister I've been diminishing for years is going to decide my professional future. How do I even begin to apologize for that? How do I ask for forgiveness for something that went so much deeper than just sibling rivalry? She looked at me with an expression that mixed hope and desperation. Do you think there's any chance that the person you've become, someone who can manage billions of dollars while still caring about individual families, might be willing to help the person I've been figure out how to become someone better? Victoria's question hung in the cold November air between us, and I could see the genuine fear in her eyes as she waited for my response. The sister who had spent years positioning herself as superior now stood before me completely vulnerable, asking for help to become a better person. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I looked out over our parents' backyard, remembering countless childhood moments when Victoria and I had been allies rather than competitors. There was the time she'd helped me build a fort in the old oak tree, or when she'd stood up to the neighborhood bullies who were teasing me about my thick glasses. Somewhere along the way, we'd lost that partnership and replaced it with a rivalry that had poisoned our relationship for years. Victoria, I said finally, turning to meet her eyes, do you remember when we were 12 and 10 and you helped me start that lemonade stand to raise money for the animal shelter? The unexpected shift in topic seemed to confuse her. Yes, I remember. But Natasha, what does that have to do with? You insisted that we donate every penny we earned, even though you really wanted to buy that new bike you'd been saving for, I continued. When I asked you why, you said that helping animals was more important than anything we could buy for ourselves. Victoria's expression softened slightly at the memory. I'd forgotten about that. I hadn't. That was the moment I realized that my little sister had a natural instinct for putting purpose before profit. You understood impact before you even knew the word. I stepped closer to her, lowering my voice. That person is still in there, Victoria. She just got buried under years of fear and societal expectations about what success should look like. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in years I saw glimpses of the compassionate child she'd once been. But how do I find her again? How do I undo years of making decisions based on status and money rather than meaning? The same way I built the consortium, I replied. One choice at a time, one project at a time, One opportunity to do better at a time. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling to find something I'd been working on for the past several months. Victoria, I want to show you something. But first, I need you to understand that what I'm about to share with you isn't charity or pity. It's a genuine business opportunity that requires someone with your exact skill set. Her brow furrowed with curiosity and a hint of hope. What kind of opportunity? The consortium has been awarded a contract to develop affordable housing initiatives in emerging markets across Latin America. We're talking about 43 cities, 6 countries, and a total project value of $4.2 billion over 8 years. I handed her my phone, showing her the preliminary project documentation. But here's the challenge. We need someone who can structure complex international financing arrangements while navigating regulatory environments in multiple countries. Victoria's eyes widened as she scrolled through the documents. Natasha, this is exactly the kind of work I've been doing at Pinnacle, just bigger, much bigger. And with a completely different purpose, I added. Instead of maximizing profits for wealthy investors, you'd be using those same skills to create stable housing for families who are currently living in poverty. Instead of closing deals that make rich people richer, you'd be structuring agreements that transform entire communities. She looked up from the phone, her expression mixing excitement with uncertainty. But I don't know anything about affordable housing development. I don't understand the social impact metrics or community engagement strategies. You don't need to start there, I said gently. You need to start with what you do know: financial modeling, regulatory compliance, client relationship management. The social impact expertise can be learned, but your technical skills are what make this project possible. Victoria handed my phone back, her hands shaking slightly. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to use your talents for something that matters beyond quarterly earnings reports. The position would be Director of International Finance for the consortium, reporting directly to me but with complete autonomy over the financial architecture of the Latin American initiative. She stared at me in disbelief. After everything I've done, after years of treating you terribly, you're offering me not just job security but a promotion? Victoria, I'm offering you the opportunity to become the person you were meant to be before fear convinced you that worth was measured in dollars. I paused, letting that sink in. But I need you to understand something important. This isn't about forgiveness or family loyalty. This is about recognizing talent and creating the team we need to succeed. Her voice was barely above a whisper. What about my position at Pinnacle? Pinnacle will be restructured as the consortium's domestic operations hub. Some employees will transition to impact investing roles. Others will need to find positions elsewhere. Your choice isn't between keeping your old job or taking a new one. It's between learning a new approach to finance or leaving the company entirely. The weight of the decision was clearly overwhelming Victoria, but I could see something shifting in her expression. The panic and desperation were being replaced by something that looked like cautious hope. The salary would be comparable to what you were expecting from the executive vice president position, I continued. But the performance bonuses would be tied to social impact metrics rather than profit margins. You'd be rewarded for the number of families housed, the sustainability of community development, and the long-term stability of the financing structures you create. Victoria was quiet for several minutes, processing everything I'd told her. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of wonder that I hadn't heard from her in years. You're saying I could use my skills to actually help people? That I could earn a good living while making a real difference in the world? I'm saying you could discover what it feels like to go to work every day knowing that your success is measured by how many lives you improve, rather than how much wealth you accumulate for people who already have more than they need. She wiped her eyes again, smearing what remained of her makeup. Natasha, why are you doing this? Why are you giving me this chance after everything? I smiled, remembering the 10-year-old girl who had given up her bike money to help animals. Because I believe that people can change, Victoria. I believe that the sister who once understood that helping others was more important than personal gain is still in there, waiting for the right opportunity to emerge. But what if I fail? What if I can't adapt to this new way of thinking about success? Then you'll learn from the failure and try again, I replied simply. That's how growth works. That's how real success is built. Not through avoiding risk, but through learning from setbacks and continuing to move toward something meaningful. Victoria took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders in a gesture that reminded me of the confident woman who had walked into dinner tonight, but with something softer and more genuine in her expression. I want to try, she said finally. I want to learn how to be someone who creates value through helping others rather than stepping on them. I want to discover what it feels like to be genuinely proud of my work, rather than just proud of my paycheck. Then we start tomorrow, I said, extending my hand toward her. The meeting Mr. Davidson mentioned? That's when we'll begin restructuring Pinnacle and planning the Latin American initiative. Are you ready to find out what it feels like to use your talents for something that actually matters? Victoria took my hand, her grip firm despite the tears still glistening in her eyes. I'm ready to find out who I can become when I stop being afraid of not being enough. 18 months later, I stood in the conference room of what was now the Riverside Impact Investment Group headquarters, reviewing the quarterly reports from our Latin American housing initiative. The numbers were extraordinary, but more importantly, the stories behind those numbers represented thousands of families who now had stable homes, children who could attend school consistently, and communities that were building sustainable economic foundations. A gentle knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts. Come in, I called, looking up to see Victoria entering with a stack of documents and the kind of genuine smile that had become her trademark over the past year and a half. I have the final approval documents from the Colombian Ministry of Housing, she said, setting the papers on my desk with visible satisfaction. The Bogotá expansion project is officially green-lighted for Phase 2. We'll be breaking ground on 2,400 additional units next month. I reviewed the documents, noting the intricate financial structures Victoria had created to ensure long-term affordability while satisfying regulatory requirements in 3 different countries. This is exceptional work, Victoria. The regulatory compliance framework you developed is going to become the template for all our future international projects. Victoria's smile widened, and I could see the pride in her eyes, not the hollow pride of closing a profitable deal, but the deep satisfaction that comes from creating something meaningful. You know what the best part is? The families from Phase 1 are already forming community associations. They're organizing childcare cooperatives, starting small businesses, even creating their own micro-lending circles. That's exactly what we hoped would happen, I said, remembering the countless hours we'd spent planning this initiative. When people have housing stability, they have the foundation to build everything else. Victoria pulled up a chair and sat down across from my desk, her demeanor relaxed in a way that would have been impossible during her Pinnacle Financial days. Natasha, I got a call yesterday from Elena Ramirez. You remember, the single mother of 3 who was one of our first residents in Medellin? I nodded, recalling the woman who had been living in a cramped single room with her children before moving into one of our housing units. She wanted to let us know that her oldest daughter, Maria, just received a scholarship to study engineering at Universidad Nacional. Elena said that having a stable address and a quiet place to study made all the difference in Maria's academic performance. Victoria's voice carried the same excitement she used to reserve for announcing major deals, but now it was about a teenager's educational opportunity rather than corporate profits. Elena also mentioned that she saved enough money from not having to move constantly to start a small catering business. She's actually hired 2 other women from the housing complex to help her. Victoria paused, shaking her head in wonder. When I was at Pinnacle, I used to measure success by how much money changed hands in a single transaction. Now I'm measuring it by how many lives improve over time. The transformation in Victoria over the past 18 months had been remarkable to witness. The anxiety and competitiveness that had defined her personality for years had gradually been replaced by genuine enthusiasm for collaborative problem-solving and community impact. She still worked long hours and maintained high standards, but her energy was now directed toward creating solutions rather than climbing hierarchies. Speaking of transformations, Victoria continued, I had lunch with our cousin David yesterday. He's thinking about leaving his corporate job to work for a renewable energy nonprofit. Apparently, our conversation at Christmas about finding meaning in work really stuck with him. This didn't surprise me. Victoria's conversion from profit-focused executive to impact-driven leader had rippled through our extended family, inspiring several relatives to reconsider their own career priorities. Her willingness to openly discuss her previous mistakes and her journey toward more meaningful work had given others permission to question their own assumptions about success. He asked me something interesting, Victoria said, pulling out her phone to check her notes. He wanted to know if there was a way to measure the value we're creating beyond just the financial metrics and housing units. Something that captures the long-term community impact. I leaned back in my chair, intrigued by the question. What did you tell him? I told him that we've actually been working on exactly that kind of measurement framework. The Community Wealth Building Index that our research team developed tracks everything from educational outcomes to small business creation to healthcare access improvements. Victoria's eyes lit up as she described the comprehensive impact assessment tools we'd implemented. We can show that every dollar invested in affordable housing generates approximately $3.20 in long-term community economic value. The sophistication of Victoria's understanding of social impact measurement represented a complete philosophical evolution from her days of focusing solely on quarterly earnings and shareholder returns. She had become fluent in the language of community development while maintaining her expertise in complex financial structures. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, Victoria said, her tone becoming more serious. I've been thinking about expanding our model to include climate resilience components. As we develop new housing projects, we could integrate renewable energy systems, sustainable water management, and climate-adaptive design features. She pulled out a detailed proposal she'd been working on. I've been collaborating with the environmental engineering team at the university, and we think we can create housing developments that actually improve environmental conditions rather than just minimizing harm. The initial investment would be higher, but the long-term cost savings and community benefits would be substantial. I reviewed her proposal, impressed by both the technical sophistication and the holistic thinking it represented. Victoria had learned to consider not just the immediate financial viability of projects, but their long-term environmental and social implications. This is exactly the kind of innovation we need, I said, making notes in the margins of her document. What kind of timeline are you thinking for pilot implementation? I'd like to start with the new development in Guatemala City, Victoria replied. The local government is already committed to environmental sustainability initiatives, and the climate challenges there make it an ideal testing ground for resilient design features. As we discussed the details of her proposal, I reflected on how dramatically our relationship had changed. The sister who once saw me as competition now brought me her ideas for collaboration. The executive who used to hoard information and credit now freely shared knowledge and celebrated team achievements. Victoria, I said as we wrapped up our planning discussion, do you ever miss the old version of success? The clear hierarchy? The individual recognition? The luxury purchases? She considered the question thoughtfully before responding. I miss the simplicity of it sometimes. It was easier when success meant beating other people rather than solving complex social problems. But I don't miss the emptiness. Victoria stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city, where construction cranes marked the locations of several affordable housing projects in various stages of development. You know what I realized about 6 months ago? When I was focused on accumulating wealth and status, I was constantly worried about losing what I had. Every day felt like defending territory rather than building something. She turned back to face me, her expression peaceful in a way I'd never seen during her corporate years. Now, every day feels like creating something that didn't exist before. Every project we complete, every family that gains housing stability, every community that develops economic resilience, it's additive rather than competitive. And personally, I asked, How has this change affected your life outside of work? Victoria smiled, a genuine warmth spreading across her face. Brandon and I are actually talking about starting a family. For years, we kept postponing children because I was so focused on the next promotion, the next deal, the next achievement that might finally make me feel successful enough. She paused, looking out at the cityscape again. Now I feel like I have something meaningful to teach a child about what it means to live a worthwhile life. The conversation was interrupted by my assistant knocking to remind us about the all-staff meeting where we'd be announcing the expansion of our operations to include projects in East Africa. As we gathered our materials, Victoria mentioned one final thought. Natasha, I know I've thanked you before for giving me this opportunity, but I don't think I've ever properly thanked you for showing me that there was a different way to think about success. You could have destroyed my career that night at Thanksgiving, and instead, you gave me the chance to discover who I really am when I'm not driven by fear and competition. I looked at my sister, still ambitious, still driven, still excellent at managing complex projects, but now channeling those qualities toward creating positive change rather than accumulating personal wealth and status. You transformed yourself, Victoria. I just provided the opportunity. I paused, remembering that cold November evening when everything changed between us. Sometimes the best way to win isn't to defeat your competition. It's to help them discover they were competing in the wrong game altogether. As we headed to the staff meeting where we'd announce our next phase of global expansion, I reflected on how profoundly that Thanksgiving dinner had changed not just our family dynamic, but our understanding of what success could look like when it was measured by the lives improved rather than the wealth accumulated. Victoria was right. Creating something meaningful felt very different from defending territory. And building a better world together felt infinitely more satisfying than building separate empires alone. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.